So the general population, the research we're just about to publish, 62% of people are experiencing imposter syndrome daily or regularly to a level that's affecting their well-being and their performance. For entrepreneurs, freelancers, solopreneurs, it's actually a shocking 82%.
Doubt your abilities or question your achievements? If so, you're not alone. Imposter syndrome is now a recognised phenomenon. More than 60% of people experience this, men and women. Today, I'm joined by Claire Josa, a woman on a mission to banish imposter syndrome forever. Her proven strategies have helped people at the European Parliament, at the Institute of Directors and more. She's going to tell us how to recognise and challenge self-sabotaging thoughts, cultivate self-confidence and build resilience in the face of self-criticism. Today is the day you and I conquer our imposter syndrome for good. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you, Bex. It's so lovely to get to join you today.
And I feel like we've set you quite a hefty task because this is like a chronic issue. People are talking about imposter syndrome everywhere. The New Yorker just published a huge essay on it. Why is this such a modern and pervasive issue and topic?
So it's been there forever. There's always been this kind of, what if they find me out? What if they realise I'm not good enough? And I suspect even cavemen and women felt the same way. It's that need to belong in the tribe, that need to fit in, that need to be accepted. But what's changed in the last 20 or so years is our ability to compare ourselves with others and judge ourselves as lacking. When I think about how, back in my olden days when I was at school, when we were only just getting the internet and email and stuff, comparing yourself only happened inside your real world connections or in a magazine or a newspaper. Whereas now, if I look at my teens, my sons, they are bombarded with thousands of social media posts and images every single day, allowing themselves to compare themselves to others, to judge themselves. And when we look at how fast life moves as well, one of the things we've found is that how stressed people are really impacts imposter syndrome. And the stresses we experience have changed. It's gone from the survival stresses to the information rush, the expectations we place on ourselves for learning curves, for being able to be the best, the hustle culture. All of this has fed into making imposter syndrome there in people's faces. And the brilliant thing is that people are now talking about it. People used to suffer in silence before. I quit the engineering career I loved back in 2001 because I felt this thing that didn't have a name and there was nobody there to help me. That kind of thing wouldn't need to happen now.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to ask you about that. But first, I think it might be useful if we define what we mean by imposter syndrome, just in case anyone listening is like, oh, I kind of know, I've heard of that, but I'm not sure what it means. So how do we actually pick that apart?
Okay, so I define it in two ways. The official way is the secret fear of being found out as not good enough despite outside world evidence that you are. Or if we're just going to kind of whisper in each other's ears here, it's the secret fear of others judging us the way we're judging ourselves.
Wow, that just sent a shiver down my spine. That kind of, if others judged us the way we judged ourselves, that would be very harsh, I think, for most of us. Yeah. And you've given a clue there that you've actually suffered from that. You've experienced that feeling before. So I'd love to hear about that journey and how you went from, because I think you're a mechanical engineer by training, you worked at Dyson. I mean, if you look at your CV, you are like the most accomplished person. How could you ever worry that you were good enough? So to tell me how you arrived at the imposter phenomenon.
So the first time I remember experiencing it before I knew it had a name was actually the day I got my degree result. I'd spent 5 years, I'd done a master's degree in mechanical engineering in German. And I remember looking, it was in the olden days when they used to put the results up on sheets for everybody to see. And I thought, all right, let's aim high. Let's start at the 2 1s. And I wasn't on the list and my heart sank. And I was like, okay, let's look at the 2 2s. And I wasn't on the list. By this point, I could just feel my heart really racing. I looked at the thirds and the fails, and I wasn't on the list. And then I looked at the firsts, and there I was. And my immediate thought was not fantastic. It was, who did I have to pull the wool over their eyes to tell me that I'm good enough to get a first? I'm a fraud. I don't deserve this. Somebody's given it to me just because I'm a woman. And I started telling myself these stories, pushed it all down, went into my engineering career. And then it was about 2001. I realized that I was on antidepressants due to stress, anxiety. I was working 14-hour days, classic imposter syndrome symptom. I had become a perfectionist. It was affecting my home relationships. 3 o'clock every single morning, I was lying awake thinking, what if today's the day they realize I'm not good enough? That I have deceived them, that I am a fraud. What if today is the day they realize I don't belong? They send me out of the factory and I'm told not to come back. And it felt really existential. It wasn't just, okay, how am I going to pay my mortgage? It went to that, and I'll die alone in a ditch, which often happens with imposter syndrome. And my coping strategy at the time, because I didn't know this thing had a name, I thought I was the only person in the world that felt that way. So what I did is I engineered being able to take a sabbatical, which is something I see so many people doing now because of imposter syndrome. I decided to take a year out to go traveling to study Spanish in South America, and I was running away, but I convinced myself that actually that was the right thing to do. And I ended up quitting a career I loved because I was so terrified that today would be the day my luck would run out and they would realize they'd made a mistake in hiring me. I came back from that year of traveling and imposter syndrome was gone. I became head of market research at Dyson, something for which I had a skill set but no paper qualifications, and I never felt it again. And it took me about 10 years to reverse engineer what I'd done, because quitting your job and going on a sabbatical for a year is not the ideal way to ditch imposter syndrome. Yeah, but
No.
I just came back and it was gone.
That's amazing. I'm going to ask you how you reverse engineered it and what you found out, but I'm keen to know whether people experience imposter syndrome in a very wide spectrum of intensity, because that sounds really full on, and that sounds like something that could definitely lead to a breakdown. But do some
Yeah.
people just get hints of it and it just has a slightly negative impact on their life? Is it a spectrum from sort of mild to severe?
It absolutely is. So there is a sliding scale from something that you can just kind of gently push out the way through to something that's completely crippling. But the problem is most people don't ask for help until they're very long way at the crippling end. The research studies I've been running over the last 10 years show there's a direct link between imposter syndrome and burnout. I was absolutely ready to burn out. Because all the symptoms of imposter syndrome and the coping strategies mean we push harder, we work harder, we're worried, we're not sleeping, there's more stress. So it's a sliding scale, but it's also context dependent. So you might have someone who feels crippled by imposter syndrome at work, but in the supermarket, they're absolutely fine. And this is really important because it means it's something that isn't part of you. It's like malfunctioning software that we can reprogram. And that context can be really, really specific, even down to the level of you're presenting in a meeting and you're fine, and then such and such a person walks in the room and suddenly imposter syndrome is in your face.
That's really interesting. And do you find that entrepreneurs are just as likely to suffer from this? Because we have an image of people who found and build businesses as being extremely confident, as having absolute faith in their abilities and a vision. But are they just as likely to have those underlying feelings of doubt and, that self-sabotage going on?
So the general population, the research we're just about to publish, 62% of people are experiencing imposter syndrome daily or regularly to a level that's affecting their well-being and their performance. For entrepreneurs, freelancers, solopreneurs, it's actually a shocking 82%.
Oh,
So
my
we are
goodness.
much more likely. And the reason for this is because imposter syndrome isn't a mindset issue. You can't positive think your way out of it. You can't affirmation your way out of it, yeah? It's about who we think we are. It's an identity level issue. And when we're out there and we're running our own business, particularly if we're the figurehead, everything feels personal. So whereas in a corporation, for example, it's I don't want to belittle it, but it's you, it's your job, but the team also takes some of that load of expectations. But when you're running your own business, it's you. And so, if deep inside you are judging yourself at that level and you're worried about how others might be judging you as well, and you're scared you'll be found out, then it's not a surprise that we hold back on sharing our ideas. We don't come and join people like you for an interview. We discount our prices without being asked. We don't take the actions that we know would grow the business, because if we grew the business, then we're more visible. And that whole cascade of self-talk means that we hold back.
Well, I suppose that's an interesting place for our listeners to start then. What kind of questions can they be asking themselves after listening to this podcast to ascertain whether they have either the beginnings or a more entrenched form of imposter syndrome? Because they might be thinking, oh, some of this might resonate, some of it might not. So how do you find out if this is something that affects you?
So firstly, it's really important in our position when we're running a business to understand the difference between imposter syndrome and self-doubt. Self-doubt is normal, natural, healthy. You stretch a comfort zone, you start a new product line, you do a bit of PR, whatever, you get a new big contract. You're going to sit there and go, oh, can I do this? And that might take a moment, it might take a week or a month, but that can I do it? That's about self-doubt. That's the kind of thing where a bit of mentoring, a bit of pep talk can really shift it, mindset level work. If what's going through your head though is not can I do this, but who am I to do that? That is a warning sign it's actually imposter syndrome, and that mindset level stuff, cognitive stuff is not going to be enough. If you find yourself giving yourself reasons for why you're not taking action that secretly your heart knows are actually going to unlock the next level for your business, then one of the things you can do is ask yourself really objectively, is this really true? This excuse I'm giving myself, the reason for not taking action, or is it just imposter syndrome speaking? And let that answer bubble up. So this can be really useful in the moment. Is it really true that I don't have enough time? Is it really true that that particular opportunity isn't a good fit? Or is it just the fear of my imposter syndrome that's making the decision for me? And that can help you to, in that moment, to make a different decision.
And that's really interesting that you said you can't mindset alter, you can't use affirmations to get yourself out of that kind of very negative thought process. So, I mean, obviously you're a specialist, people can come and talk to you, but just to sort of start that work on your own, is there anything that you can do, you know, without talking to a therapist, but actually is there a structure or a strategy you can begin to try and reverse that?
There absolutely is. And things like mindset work, it will always help, but it's like sticking plasters. So it's the coping strategies. And the problem with mindset level work is that the primal part of your brain that's responsible for keeping us safe, for spotting dangers, risks, threats, that's already self-sabotaging by the time the mindset part of your brain notices it's already doing it. So you're constantly playing this catch up. So when I work with people on this, and what I teach in things like Ditching Imposter Syndrome in the book or in the Imposter Syndrome Hacks app, are techniques you can use in that moment to press pause. Because we don't always have time for navel gazing. Sometimes you will literally be about to step up on stage or to present at a networking event, and in that moment you need to find the courage. But I also teach techniques that allow you to go below the surface. So this is my inner engineer, is that root cause level work. So rather than dealing with the symptoms, we're dealing with the causes. When you clear those out, you don't need the coping strategies anymore. And those are stored both in the thinking mind, but also in the body. Because one of the things that we found is imposter syndrome is often linked to trauma. And by trauma, I don't mean that you have to have lived in a war zone. Something like having a micromanaging bully boss, or working in a toxic team, or having a series of negative experiences that mean you don't feel safe being who you are really good predictors for who will experience imposter syndrome. So by going and dealing with the emotions below the surface that were driving those, you don't have to get into therapy, but it allows you to healthily release the triggers that were leading to the imposter syndrome. And there are techniques that I can teach that will work just in that moment, but I always encourage people, it's time. If your heart is calling you, it's time to do that deeper work and actually go and look at what are the buttons there waiting to be pressed that mean when somebody sends me an email with that tone, I potentially overreact, or I hold back, or I get defensive.
That's really interesting, because I wondered if there was a root cause, and if some people, when they really unpack their feelings or their triggers, as you call them, whether there's something that happened when they're at universities, or like, you know, a tutor might have made a throwaway comment that stuck with them, or yeah, it's funny how these things can lodge in your brain, but whether you actually have to go back and you have to almost find the root cause, or whether you just have to accept. Yeah.
So you were spot on, Bex. One of the problems that I see is people looking for that root cause event. So, for example, I'm about to publish my 10th book, which I kind of can't believe I've not published a book in 5 years, and it's called Coaching Imposter Syndrome. So it's actually for, you know, coaches, consultants, line managers, for when imposter syndrome gate crashes your client conversations. And I've also published 2 novels inside those 10 self-help books, and I didn't publish my first novel until I was 45. And I didn't think I was a real author because I hadn't published a story. And it went back to a throwaway comment from my lovely English teacher when I was 15. I'd done what I thought was one of my best GCSE English essays ever, and she gave me a B and wrote contrived. And I was a bit of a Hermione Granger, so a B for me was a real kind of like stomach punch. But it was the word contrived and the embarrassment that I had to go and look it up. I didn't even know what it meant. Yeah. And and I picked up
What
this
a
belief.
burn.
I know, exactly. Isn't it brilliant? And it was back at the time in Dallas where Bobby Ewing had just, those of a certain age, Bobby Ewing had just appeared back in the shower and Sue Ellen had just dreamed him dying for the previous 2 seasons. So that's what she meant, is contrived there. But I picked up that belief of I can't write a story. And for years, I never told my kids a made-up story. And then I did some of my work on myself, and I went to a creative writing course, and within 4 days, I drafted 2 novels, and within 4 months, one of them was in print. But the teacher didn't cause that "who am I to write a novel?" She just pressed the button. And when we look for that root cause event, we often find the wrong thing. Because often it's much younger. And her word contrived, if I'd felt comfortable in my own skin and confident in my ability as a writer, she could have written that and I'd have gone, yeah, fair cop. Yeah. And it wouldn't have bothered me. The fact is, I had that button there for her to be pressed. So what I do when I work with people or when they consume my work, and in whatever form, is it's stop looking in the rearview mirror. We don't need to find the root cause event. What we're dealing with instead is the emotion and the sensation in the body that it creates, because then you clear every single event in the daisy chain and you don't need to know the content, because often the content's actually quite painful, and this isn't therapy. And for the vast majority of people, we don't need to go into the content to clear imposter syndrome.
I think that would be a relief for a lot of people who maybe balk at the idea of therapy, but still would like to do some positive work on their reactions to situations and their confidence. And I totally hear what you're saying, that sometimes if you try and apportion blame to the actors in your life, you almost give away your own power to resolve that issue, or to, I don't know, improve your own spirit or your ability to deal with things, because it always comes back to, oh well, that person broke me, and until they can take that away, there's nothing I can do about it. It's kind of more of a victim mentality. So I love that that's not part of your work on this.
It's actually the opposite. It's the opposite. When I reverse engineered what I'd done back in 2001, I created a 5-step process, and step 4 is actually reclaim your personal power. So it is the opposite of giving that power away. And if we, as you say, if we look for that root cause event, then we can end up with a badge of honor of, oh, well, I've got imposter syndrome because this horrible thing was said to me. And that can actually keep us stuck. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know that you've done your own research on this, but when I've looked at previous studies, there seems to be a bit of a skew towards more women experiencing imposter syndrome. I don't know if that's what you found when you've just done your own research. But does it affect women more than men, or are women just more likely to own up to it?
So would you like something hot off the press that nobody else has been told yet?
Yes, please.
From our new research study, okay. So we've known for a few years that actually it affects men and women at very similar rates. Like if you look at the stats and the confidence intervals, it's pretty much the same, but they respond to it differently. Men are much more likely to push on down the fear and push on through. Women are much more likely to hold back and have an emotional response and play small. And neither is ideal, because for men it leads to anxiety, it can lead to drug abuse, it can lead to mental health issues. For women, it's one of the core drivers in the gender pay gap. So it's pretty similar actually on the levels at which they experience it. They just self-sabotage differently. What we've just found in the 2024 imposter syndrome research study, though, is that for women with carer responsibilities, that 62% is actually 82% experiencing imposter syndrome daily and regularly. So it's significantly higher than the general population. And what we found is this is because since the pandemic, it's juggling those caring responsibilities with what modern work now looks like, with hybrid working, with return to office mandates, but you've got reduced childcare because all the childminders went bust over lockdown. You've got fewer trains because the train companies cut back their services. So it's harder for you to be able to juggle. Unfortunately, what's still falling too often on women is that mental load of running the household, whether it's with children or older relatives, and running the business or your career. And this is making imposter syndrome significantly worse for that particular portion of the population.
That's really interesting. So you can actually say that outside stressors do make up quite a lot of the catalyst for imposter syndrome. It's not all from inside. It is affected by the amount that's being loaded onto you, the amount of tasks, the amount of responsibility. There is a correlation.
It is, and it's brain space. And one of the things we found through our research over the years is we've got a model that we call the 3 pillars of imposter syndrome, because it's not just inside. And everybody's out there trying to say, well, you've got to fix yourself so that you can be tougher and more resilient in this really challenging world that we're now living in. So the 3 pillars are the culture, the environment, and the habits. So the culture, for example, an organization's culture, or it might be a national culture, family culture, faith-based culture. The environment is, what does that mean on a practical level? And then the habits are the bit inside us that we can control. So you can take somebody with raging imposter syndrome from one company to another, and imposter syndrome disappears. Yeah, or you can move them and it suddenly appears, because the culture and the environment will affect it. There's also that direct link between our chronic stress levels and anxiety and imposter syndrome. The more stressed you are, the more anxious you are, the less resilient you are to imposter syndrome, and the more unlikely it is that your coping strategies will work. So you have to then do that deeper work to make yourself immune, to remove the button that my English teacher was able to press when I was 15. Yeah. And so many people since. Yeah.
And I made a slightly flyaway comment at the beginning of our call saying, let's conquer imposter syndrome, let's banish it for good. But can you banish it for good? Or is it a case of having to, like in addiction, you're never cured, you have to keep fighting, keep slaying that dragon, and the dragon will keep growing you heads? Like, do you have to just keep going and keep defeating it over and over again? Is it a lifelong struggle?
So if what you're doing is following the advice that's on Google, you are going to be in that lifetime cycle. If you do the deeper root cause work, it literally goes. So what you find then is you've cleared out the stuff that meant you were vulnerable to imposter syndrome. So for me, for example, if I'm asked to do something that's a real comfort zone stretch, what happens is it shifts slightly our view of who we need to be. And the view of who we think we are hasn't quite caught up yet. So all that happens for me now is I'll feel a bit of a flinch. That's one of the warning signs. Your body always knows when imposter syndrome is coming. That's my, okay, I don't see myself as that version of me yet. Fine, what do I need to let go of to become that version of me? Great, done. No drama. So I'm still learning and growing, but it's without the drama, without the pain, without the fear, without the catastrophizing. And this is really what you get when you've deeply cleared it out. Whereas if I was running imposter syndrome, I'd have to grit my teeth, push on through, probably get somebody else to reply to the invitations and emails so I don't self-sabotage. Yeah, all of that's gone. So yes, I still learn and stretch and grow, but you can be completely free from this. And this is what my students and so many of my readers, listeners and clients have found is it's suddenly a non-issue, but it doesn't make you arrogant. This is something that a lot of people think I need imposter syndrome to be humble. It doesn't make you arrogant. It doesn't lose you friends. It just means you're comfortable in your own skin. And you get to be who you really are without the masks and the armor. And that becomes contagious. it gives other people permission to do the same too.
And so when you came back from your sabbatical and you'd figured out how to deal with your own imposter syndrome, obviously you went back to a very high flying role, but then you still decided to step away to create your coaching business, to create this project. So
Yeah.
was that because your experience of imposter syndrome was such like a massive impact in your life that you just had to focus on that afterwards? Or did you feel like, I don't know, that imposter syndrome has sort of soured mechanical engineering and that part of your life? Like, why make such a big leap?
So I absolutely loved my work at Dyson, and Monday morning, first thing, it would be me, James, and the chief engineer. We'd go through the designs from the previous week. I was the voice of the customer, and we would get to decide which ones had another week's grace to be experimented with. So it was a really exciting job for me as an engineer. But I was studying psychology. I'd become an NLP trainer, so neuro-linguistic programming. I was doing all sorts of therapy work in the background, because I realised I actually wanted to make a bigger difference. Back in my engineering days on the shop floor, my nickname was Smiler, because every morning I would set myself a mission as I walked from the desk to the coffee: how many people could I make smile? And I had this realisation that actually that was why I was here. There's only so much difference I could make by making bits of shiny coloured plastic that clean carpets extremely well. So they're actually, life can kind of conspires to give you the kick up the backside sometimes. So I wanted to do my NLP trainers training. It was a 2-month long course. I couldn't get a sabbatical to do it. So in that moment of inspiration and insanity, I quit my job. So I quit my job to go on a training course, and I've never looked back. And then those first few executive coaching clients I had, they all had this same thing that I'd had all those years ago. And all I had to give them, despite my toolkit, was sticking plasters and coping strategies. And it set me on a mission to be able to decode what I'd done so that I could teach them to do the same too.
And because I know this is basically your secret sauce, but can you give me one of the sort of deep dive style analytical tools that like a sneak peek for our listeners, something that they could try? Could you just give us a little hint?
Of course. Of course. So one of the things that you'll find is raging if imposter syndrome strikes, because it comes and goes in the course of a day or a month, is your inner critic will probably be going crazy. So one of the most potent things that you can do right there and right then, you can't argue yourself out of negative self-talk. If you start trying to have a row with that voice inside going, but I am good enough and I can do this, it's going to trigger something called the backfire effect, where it's going to dig its heels in and say, right, I'm on a mission now to share with you the 3 million bits of evidence that prove you're not good enough. So what you can do in that moment is you can calm the self-talk. The mind, the body, and the emotions are all linked. So when we think a negative thought, it fires off biochemical reactions in the body that then create our experience of emotion that fire off more thoughts, which is how we end up in that cycle. So right there and then, what you can do is you can take your right hand and place it over your diaphragm. So that's between the rib cage and the belly button. Yay, go for it, Bex.
I'm doing it.
Yay. And it works best if you've practiced this before you need it, so that your body's used to it. And then you can take 3 deep sighing breaths. So if anybody is listening to this and they're operating machinery or driving, please don't do this right now. But if you're safe, it can help potentially to close your eyes, and you breathe in through your nose and you breathe out with a sigh. And you do it twice more. Bex, I'll let you do that in your own time. And it's just helping you to settle and land. And you can feel that relaxation response in the body. And then if it's safe and comfortable with eyes softly closed, you can spend about a minute just letting your whole awareness rest on the movement of your hand as you breathe in and you breathe out.
I mean, this would be relaxing for anything really, though, wouldn't it? This would be a great way to just force yourself to stop a few times a day and just have a little reset. But I can imagine if your feelings are overloaded and you're in flux and you're just in a complete pickle, that would be a really good way to take it down a notch and just think, right, is it really that big a deal as well?
Exactly, because when I said about earlier, is this really true or is it just imposter syndrome speaking? It's like in the UK with our gear stick cars, stick
Mm.
shifts in the States, we have to go through neutral to change gear. When I was learning to drive when I was 17, that's something I found a really difficult concept, and it gets really expensive on repairs if you try to shift gear without going through neutral. And it's the same for the brain. So, what this technique does is twofold. Firstly, it's resetting the stress response. So, that whole fight, flight, freeze, amygdala stress response that makes the inner critic do this
Mm.
calms. It's
Mm.
putting us back in neutral, which gives you back part two, which is the hand over the diaphragm area, is actually a power place. If we look at ancient yoga and meditation, that's actually one of the energy centers for reclaiming our personal power and
Mm.
also for feeling safe.
Mm.
So those two combined mean that you reset the stress response. The thoughts will slow down, the thoughts will calm down, they will quieten, and that gives you a gap to then choose a different thought, to choose a different action. And it's the kind of thing, without the sighing, because it's a bit obvious, but it's the kind of thing that you can do in the middle of a meeting. It's the
Mm.
kind of thing you can do on a client call. It's the kind of thing you can do before sending an email that maybe had been triggering imposter syndrome. And you're absolutely right. If you did this 5 or 10 times a day, instead of getting to the end of the day and your stress levels are super high, you get to the end of the day and you're actually pretty okay. So
Mm.
you're also, with that technique, it sounds so simple, but you're also helping to remove the body's unconscious addiction to adrenaline.
Mm.
Because the self talk gives us an adrenaline and cortisol hit, the stress hormones, those are addictive. And what you'll find sometimes is if you're feeling a bit tired, the body will actually say, well, I need a cortisol hit. And it'll
Mm.
fire off a load of what I call mind story drama to give you that adrenaline and cortisol hit, to give you the energy to keep going through the day. So it's an incredibly simple technique, but potentially really powerful in the moment and to start the preventative work.
Mm. That's really great advice, because I was realizing as you were talking that there have been times when I think I have had, is it imposter syndrome? I suppose I'd have to really unpack it a bit, but I definitely get moments where I'm like, oh God, is this something that I can do? And my response, I realized, is that I imagine like a big red button, and I'm not going to swear because this, who knows who's listening, but it's like it says F it on it, and I just like bang that button. So when I feel that kind of panic rising, somehow you just diffuse it by banging the button. Like, who cares if it all explodes? Never mind, just let it go. Just send the email, just say that's my deadline or my rate, and just let it go into the world. But that is like not necessarily the most calm and considered response to imposter syndrome. So I think your way is probably a much improved way of dealing with it.
Well, the thing is, as well, when you do this however many times a day, it means that when that email comes through or needs to be sent, you're no longer doing it from up here, you're already back down there.
Mm.
And it
Mm.
means that the tone we're using is different, because we can all misread tones in emails, but we can also pretty accurately guess what they are. And if
Mm.
somebody's super stressed and they've sent it back with a bang, then it just escalates conflict. So this way, you don't have to go through that whole stress hormone stuff, and you just get to be a bit more in flow.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you've mentioned, Claire, that you have written a whole bunch of books. Is it 5 or is it 6 now? How many
It's
books is it?
10.
It's 10
10.
books.
10.
Wow. Okay. So I kind of want to know, and on behalf of our listeners as well, many of
Yeah.
whom are building businesses, but
Yeah.
also potentially would love to be authors, they have books in them. How on earth have you balanced growing your business, managing your clients, doing all your research, and putting in all the hours that it takes to create 10 of these manuscripts that are then bestsellers? Like, how did you do that?
So the first one I actually wrote on maternity leave from my youngest son, because my brain was just atrophying and I needed to teach. I need to create. It's just hardwired in me. And so that I would have him in the baby kind of carrier thing on my front and I would just type. That just had to be written. What I do now, so for example, for coaching imposter syndrome, which is about to come out, I always treat myself to a day with post-it notes, brightly coloured Sharpies, and index cards. And I will brain dump everything about a topic onto those. And then my inner engineer has lots of caffeine, and I arrange them on my living room floor into a journey. And I have to be really strict. So before I start to write a book, I know what the promise is. And that's almost always going to be the tagline. So for coaching imposter syndrome, it's how to handle it if imposter syndrome gate crashes your coaching conversations. Because that really is the energy. It's like, oh gosh, this colleague or client's got imposter syndrome. What do I do now? Yeah. And then I go through that massive pile of Post-its and index cards, and I have to be really ruthless. Does this help somebody to move towards that goal? Or is it going to distract them? Because what to leave out is actually harder. Then I just create a flow. When I was studying engineering, I studied it in Germany for a couple of years, and they have something out there they call the red thread that had to go through any report or thesis. So I create the red thread, and I focus at that planning stage on how do I make this pajama ready? Because most people are reading my books at home, 10, 11 o'clock at night, brain's only half switched on. I'm not sat by their side to explain things. So when I've got that red thread, then I just break it down into sections and I look at it each day and think, which one do I feel like writing today? And I write the one that makes me curious or excited that day. I'll do about an hour, and then I'll get to a point every few weeks of, I'm really avoiding writing that bit. What's going on there? And 9 times out of 10, it's because it doesn't need to be in the book. So it's that little and often, but holding back the energy of writing the book to create that red thread journey path for the reader, and being really clear, just like a novel, you choose the start point for a novel, you choose the end point. And it's the same with a non-fiction book. Where is that reader right now? Where do I want them to get to by the end? And what is the path I want to guide them through in between?
That's really interesting, the little and often, because I think a lot of people think, right, I just need to take like 3 months off and write it. But in fact, you can, by scheduling in the time, instead of pottering around doing something, meetings, whatever, just schedule that 1 hour and be like, right, this is my writing time.
Exactly. And when you've got that really clear journey map, mapped out, that journey route mapped out, when you've got that, you can just duck in and just do a chapter. Yeah, or you can just duck in that day and think, I'm not in the mood for wordsmithing. Fine, I will just put more notes into this chapter. What are the key things I want them to learn? What are the quotes I might include? What are the surprises? Always include surprises. And I've learned so much about writing non-fiction from writing my novels, is how to have hooks and cliffhangers in a non-fiction book to make people keep reading. Because I don't know about you, Bex, but I collect books, not expensive books. I just love buying them, and the majority of them never get read. So that's actually our biggest challenge as an author, is not to sell the book, but to get the people who've bought it to consume it, because it doesn't change your life just by sitting on the bedside table.
No, absolutely. And I'm curious, Claire, to talk to you a bit about how you took a really amazing idea and approach to helping people and turned it into a business, because you can have the most amazing strategies, coaching, like approaches. You can have all of that, but you have to actually get people to come and see you. You have to get them to find you in the first place. So how did you turn what you knew would be sort of a game-changing, imposter syndrome focused like toolkit, and how did you then get people to come, and like how did you get people to buy it? How did you get people to trust you?
It changes so often. And if I look at the last 20 years, what worked when I started is different to even what worked last year. And I'm already seeing changes as, 2024 as we're recording this. So I think one of the keys is you've got to stay in your lane, be informed by what everybody else is saying. But you talked earlier about, some of the really big name entrepreneurs and what if they've had imposter syndrome. What I've found through our research is a lot of them have never had it. And that's why they found it so straightforward to become a big name. And so that taught me that other people's advice might not work for me. I know, for example, I have a complete visceral allergy to hustle bro culture. It doesn't work for me. Works for others. Brilliant. Go for it. Enjoy it. For me, I've got to be in flow. And what's really worked for growing the business is knowing exactly who I'm serving and who I'm not. Knowing exactly how I can help them, and actually having 4 very different products depending on how ready they are to commit, whether they can put 5 minutes in a day, whether they want to blitz imposter syndrome, whether they want to work with others on imposter syndrome. So what are their needs? And then making sure I'm just showing up consistently. But the market research has really, really helped. There's nothing that we do that isn't informed by what our customers are telling us. And there isn't a day goes past that we're not asking for input, ideas, questions, feedback, blocks, barriers, and using that, but being really clear by knowing who you're serving and who you're not. It means you know who to listen to, because you might have somebody tell you that'll never work. Well, it'll never work for them, but maybe they're not your audience. So it really was about niching, that kind of inch wide, mile deep. And then over the last 10 years, is that getting wider?
That's really interesting. I did an interview earlier today, and the guy said, you mustn't listen to your noisiest customers. You need to listen to your best customers. And it can be very hard to differentiate between the two. So it's funny that I'm sort of hearing that reinforced now. And also interesting because everything that you do, you seem to bring that mechanical, that engineering approach where it's all about the design up front and planning it out, because then that actually makes the execution so much more straightforward. So it's interesting that that's your approach to everything, whether it's your coaching, your books, growth, helping people. It seems to be that is like front loading that plan and design part. It's just really fascinating.
It is, and it's really important for me as well, because I'm an ideas generator. So I can sit there, I'm a nightmare on holiday. I'll be sitting in a bar with my family and I'll have designed 3 training courses on the back of napkins. Yeah, but then because the ideas just flow.
Yeah.
But also my family knows that's when I'm happiest. So actually it helps them have a great holiday too. And it keeps me quiet for a bit. But it's then that, okay, so how do we turn this brilliant creative idea into something that's actually going to work and be reproducible? How can we test it? How can we get the feedback? And there's part of me just wants to dive in and write or create the course, but there's most of me that knows it's almost like stretching a rubber band, that potential energy when you then ping it across the room for sitting in the back of the classroom. Never did that. Yeah, it's when you build up that potential energy of, okay, we're in the planning stage, execution. You've built up so much energy, but you've taken out the fluff and the waste, both for you as a creating team, but also for the client consuming whatever it is you're creating for them, and you're meaning that they're going to get much more reliable, repeatable results.
No, that's really interesting. And we touched on this earlier, Claire, which is as an entrepreneur, what are you missing out on, or what are you, I don't know, what's happening? What negative impact is your imposter syndrome having on you and your business that you might be unconscious of? So I'd like to talk a bit more about that, like why with our imposter syndrome. But then also I'd love to talk about like what benefits and what incredible impacts you've seen. You just could be anonymized, but amongst your clients or in the general world, when people have dealt with it, like what they've been able to go on and do. So I want to hear both sides.
So when you're running your own business with imposter syndrome, particularly if you are the face of the business, so it's kind of about you rather than something that you're making, then it's hard because you're so visible. And so if a launch flops, I mean, I have that t-shirt. Yeah, these things happen. If a launch flops, it's really hard not to take it personally and go down that rabbit hole of nobody loves me. So imposter syndrome can do things like that. It can also mean that you get a client inquiry and you offer them a discount before they've even asked for it. And they might have been about to say, actually, that's really affordable. Or we have bad boundaries where we overgive and we allow too much scope creep, which we then end up secretly resenting. Or we take on clients that we know are not a good fit, who we'll hate working with because we're scared that there won't be anybody else in the pipeline. There's something that we've got from our research called the 4 Ps of imposter syndrome. So this is another way it affects us as business owners. They are perfectionism, procrastination, project paralysis, and people pleasing. So if imposter syndrome is sky high, you can imagine how the 4 of those are going to impact your business. When you clear imposter syndrome, they kind of disappear. Yeah, the only reason I procrastinate now is if I'm exhausted. And that's just my body saying, Claire, just step away from the screen. And I haven't been listening. So these are some of the ways it can affect us. And also, if you're a more extrovert preference person and you get your energy from other people, if you're then secretly terrified that they're judging you the way your internal dialogue is judging yourself, that can be really painful. It can be really difficult to be networking. If you've got an introvert preference, it can make it far too easy as a result to become a hermit and not build those relationships and connections because of that deep-seated fear of rejection and not belonging. When you've cleared it, So we had an example last week. So I train people up to master coach level in these techniques and certification programs. One of our master coaches had worked with somebody who was not getting results, and she's a sales consultant rather than a formal coach. And what she found is in just 4 sessions with this client who hadn't been getting the results, she'd been doing what she was told by this consultant, but it just wasn't working. Within 4 sessions, this woman had gone from struggling to sleep every single night to winning a sales award. Because what had been happening is she'd been holding back on the energy with which she was taking those actions. So it was almost paying lip service in order to please the consultant rather than full in and loving it, because she was terrified but didn't have the words to articulate it. Not everybody knows what imposter syndrome is, and most of them think it's incurable. So that kind of thing is really common. And also, when you clear imposter syndrome, you then only work with the people who, as you just described, are your best clients. And people who are a bad fit, where it's just not going to work between you, you lovingly pass them on to somebody that would be a good fit. So actually you enjoy your business more, you have more energy, you will find that you magnetize almost opportunities to get your word out there. And you get that satisfaction. Most of us are doing what we're doing because we want to make a difference. It doesn't matter whether we're selling a service or a product. We want to make a difference in people's lives. And when you do that from a place of excitement and flow, rather than fear and forcing, that is a very different business.
Wow, Claire, that's amazing. I think that's probably a great place to stop, because that's like a call to arms for anyone to deal with their imposter syndrome, because the impact could be just life-changing. Yes. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. You are an absolute font of information, and I think there's a lot everyone can learn from this episode and a lot for them to think about afterwards as well.
Thank you, Bex.
Has this helped you banish your imposter syndrome? If so, let us know by getting on the socials, tagging Sage UK and using the hashtag SoundAdvicePodcast. We've got some great resources for you on this topic over on sage.com/podcast. And lovely Claire, kind Claire, has also created a scorecard so you can find out more about your imposter syndrome. It's free. Visit clairejosa.com/soundadvice to check it out, or find her on LinkedIn and YouTube. See you soon for more Entrepreneurs Unfiltered.